She was filthy, shaking from hunger, and asking for food behind a small diner in New York. No one knew she was a millionaire, not the waitress who gave her last meal, not the people who ignored her, and not even the woman herself, because by that night, she believed she had lost everything. Before we begin, I want to say something from the heart. If stories like this bring you comfort, reflection, or hope, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. When you do that, you're not just clicking a button. You're helping this work continue, helping these stories reach other people who may need them today. 3 months earlier, Laura McAllister stood in the executive boardroom of McAllister Properties on the 47th floor, overlooking Manhattan like a queen surveying her kingdom. 55 years old, sharp as cut glass, with silver threading through her dark hair in a way that made her look distinguished rather than old. She had built this empire with her own hands. Every brick, every contract, every risk calculated down to the decimal point. The company was worth $230 million. Her signature was on buildings across 3 states. Her name opened doors that others couldn't even find. But that morning, as she signed what she thought was a routine family trust restructuring document, Laura McAllister signed away her entire life. She just didn't know it yet. Her brother Richard had smiled when she signed. That should have been the first warning. Richard never smiled unless he was winning something. But Laura had been tired that day, distracted by the endless meetings, the constant decisions, the weight of running an empire alone. Her husband had died 6 years earlier. No children, no close friends, really. Just business associates who respected her mind and feared her temper. Richard was family, blood. The only family she had left. The document he'd placed before her looked legitimate. Her attorney, the man she'd trusted for 20 years, had reviewed it, or so Richard claimed. Later, she would discover that attorney had been bought, bribed, turned against her with promises of percentages and offshore accounts. But in that moment, exhausted and alone in her glass tower, Laura had simply signed her name in blue ink and thought about the dinner reservation she'd made for one that evening. What happened next? I need you to see it for yourself. The unraveling started small. A credit card declined at her favorite restaurant. An error, surely. Then her corporate card, then her personal accounts, frozen. When she called the bank, they spoke in careful, legal language about ownership disputes and pending litigation. By the time she reached her office the next morning, her keycard didn't work. Security guards she'd hired, men who'd worked for her for years, stood blocking the elevator with apologetic faces and firm instructions. Richard had moved fast, impossibly fast. The kind of speed that only comes from months of careful planning. He'd filed legal claims asserting she was mentally incompetent. He'd manufactured medical records, testimony from paid doctors she'd never met. He'd frozen every account, every asset, every single dollar she'd spent 30 years accumulating. And because the legal system moves painfully slowly, there was nothing she could do but wait for hearings that were scheduled weeks away. Laura fought, of course. She called lawyers, demanded meetings, threatened litigation. But lawyers need retainers. Hotels need credit cards. Even the apartment she owned outright was suddenly tied up in legal claims she couldn't access. Within 72 hours, Laura McAllister went from millionaire to effectively homeless, standing on a sidewalk with one suitcase, her phone dying, and nowhere to go. Pride kept her moving at first. She'd fix this. She'd find someone who could help. She'd untangle this nightmare and destroy Richard so completely he'd wish he'd never been born. But days turned into weeks. The few friends she called didn't answer, or worse. They answered with uncomfortable pauses and excuses. Everyone loved you when you had power. No one loved you when you didn't. She stayed in cheap motels until her emergency cash ran out. Then cheaper ones. Then places that didn't ask questions and smelled like mildew and broken dreams. Her clothes grew dirty. She stopped being able to afford laundry. The mirror showed her a woman she didn't recognize, hollowed out and desperate, aging 10 years in 3 weeks. Marcus Chen found her on a Tuesday. He'd been her property manager for a building in Brooklyn, a loyal employee who'd worked his way up from maintenance to management over 15 years. He'd heard rumors about what happened, seen the news reports that painted Laura as unstable, possibly criminal. But Marcus had worked for Laura long enough to know the difference between truth and poison. When he saw her sitting on a bench in Prospect Park, staring at nothing with empty eyes, he didn't hesitate. He couldn't offer much. Marcus lived in a tiny studio apartment in Queens, barely 600 square feet, a place Laura would never have noticed in her previous life. But he offered what he had: a couch, some food, a door that locked, safety, for a little while, until she could figure out what to do next. Laura accepted because she had no choice, because night was coming and she was so tired, because something inside her had broken and she wasn't sure how to fix it. She slept on Marcus's worn couch that smelled like old coffee and kindness. And for the first time in weeks, she slept through the night. But the money Marcus made wasn't enough to support two people. He worked long hours managing a different property now, one that Laura's brother had somehow acquired in the chaos. The irony burned like acid. Marcus would leave before dawn and return after dark, slipping her a $20 bill when he could spare it, rationing food like they were preparing for winter. Laura couldn't stay. She knew that. Marcus was risking too much, and she was drowning him in her disaster. So one morning, she left before he woke up. She took nothing but the clothes she wore and walked into the city with no plan and no hope. The legal hearing was still 2 weeks away. 2 weeks felt like forever when you hadn't eaten since yesterday, when your body hurt and your mind felt wrapped in fog. When the woman you used to be felt like a story someone else had told you once, long ago. That's how she ended up in that alley behind the diner, shaking from hunger, her pride finally shattered into pieces too small to gather. She'd walked for hours, maybe days. Time had stopped meaning much. There was a dumpster and a back door and the smell of frying food that made her stomach cramp with need. She'd never begged before, never asked for anything she hadn't earned. But she was asking now, knocking on that door with trembling hands, hoping someone, anyone, might show her mercy. By the time she reached New York, she wasn't pretending to be homeless. She truly believed she had become one. Taylor Hayes had been on her feet for 11 hours straight when she heard the knocking at the back door. 3 double shifts that week already, and her lower back felt like someone had taken a hammer to her spine. 30 years old and moving like she was 60. That's what grief and exhaustion did to a person. That's what working yourself to the bone to pay off your dead husband's medical bills did to your body. The diner was called Mel's, though Mel had been dead for 15 years and nobody had bothered changing the sign. It sat squeezed between a laundromat and a pawn shop on a street in Queens that tourists never found and locals tried to forget. The coffee was burned, the pie was yesterday's, and the regulars tipped in quarters. But it was work, honest work. And after Jake died 2 years ago, leaving her with $60,000 in hospital debt and a wedding ring she couldn't afford to keep, Taylor had learned that honest work was all that mattered. She'd loved Jake since high school, married him at 23, buried him at 28. Colon cancer, stage 4, discovered too late because they didn't have insurance, and he kept saying he was fine. It was just stress, just a bad stomach, nothing to worry about. By the time he admitted something was wrong, the something had already won. The treatments had drained everything. Their savings, their car, their tiny apartment in Astoria. Friends had helped at first, setting up fundraisers and meal trains, and all those beautiful gestures that people make when tragedy strikes someone else's life. But fundraisers run dry. Friends move on. Life continues for everyone except the person left behind, working double shifts at a diner that smelled like old grease and broken dreams, trying to pay off debt for a man who wasn't even alive to know she was still fighting for him. The knocking came again. Weak. Hesitant. Not like the delivery guys who pounded like they were trying to break through steel. Taylor glanced at the clock. 9:47. Her shift had ended at 9:30, but she'd stayed to clean because Miguel, the night cook, had thrown his back out and gone home early.
The owner, a man named Frank who showed up twice a month to collect money and complain, didn't care about overtime. He'd dock her pay if she submitted it. She should have ignored the knocking. Should have grabbed her coat and her tips, $63 in crumpled bills and loose change, and walked out the front door toward the subway. Should have gone home to her studio apartment where the heat barely worked and the neighbors fought loud enough to hear through the walls. Should have heated up the cup of ramen she'd been planning for dinner and tried to sleep before her next shift started at 6 a.m. But Taylor had never been good at ignoring people who needed help. That's why she'd married a man who needed her. Why she'd stayed with him through every hospital visit, every treatment, every moment when he was too weak to stand. Why she'd held his hand when he died and promised him she'd be okay, even though they both knew it was a lie. She opened the back door. The woman standing there looked like she'd aged 100 years in a hard life. Thin to the point of skeletal, her clothes hanging off her frame like they belonged to someone else. Dirty, that was Taylor's first thought. This woman was dirty in a way that spoke few brutal days. Her hair, once probably dark and maybe even elegant, hung in greasy tangles around a face that might have been beautiful if it wasn't so hollowed out by hunger and desperation. But it was the eyes that stopped Taylor cold, because this woman's eyes weren't empty. They were full of something worse than emptiness. They were full of shame so deep it had weight, shame that pressed down like gravity. Shame that made the woman unable to meet Taylor's gaze for more than a second before looking away at the ground. "I'm sorry," the woman whispered, and her voice cracked like glass breaking. "I'm so sorry. I haven't eaten in 3 days. If you have anything at all, even scraps. I'm not picky. She didn't finish. Couldn't finish. Her whole body was shaking, and Taylor couldn't tell if it was from cold or hunger or the crushing weight of having to beg a stranger for food. Taylor should have said no. She should have explained that she couldn't help, that the diner had policies about giving away food, that Frank would fire her if he found out. She should have closed the door and walked away and let this woman become someone else's problem, someone else's moral choice. But here's the thing about Taylor Hayes that most people didn't know, that she barely admitted to herself. She'd been hungry before, not 3 days without food hungry, but hungry enough to understand what it felt like when your stomach ate itself and your hands shook and the world felt like it was tilting sideways. After Jake died, before she got the job at Mel's, there'd been a week when she'd lived on ketchup packets and saltines stolen from a coffee shop. A week when she'd understood, really understood, how quickly a person could fall through the cracks of the world. "Wait here," Taylor said. She went back inside, her mind racing. There was half a meatloaf left from the dinner rush, mashed potatoes, almost a full container. Green beans that Frank would just throw out in the morning anyway. Taylor moved quickly, efficiently, loading up a takeout container with more food than one person could eat in a sitting. Real food, hot food. The kind of meal that could save someone who was slipping under. The thing was, that meatloaf was supposed to be Taylor's dinner. She'd planned to take it home, stretch it across 2 meals maybe, save the $12 she would have spent on groceries tomorrow. $63 in tips sounded like a lot until you remembered that rent was due in a week and the electric bill was overdue and the payment plan for Jake's medical debt required $200 minimum every month or they'd send it to collections. Taylor stood there in the harsh fluorescent light of the diner kitchen, holding that container of food, doing math in her head. Math that didn't work out no matter how she calculated it. If she gave this food away, she'd go home to that cup of ramen, just ramen, maybe some crackers if she had any left. And tomorrow, she'd be hungry during her shift, distracted, moving slower because her body was running on empty. But then she thought about Jake, about the last thing he'd said to her, delirious with morphine and barely conscious, 3 hours before he died. He'd squeezed her hand and whispered, "You're the best person I ever met. Don't forget that. Don't let the world make you forget that." She'd cried then. She was crying now, just a little, standing alone in that kitchen at 9:50 at night, making a choice that shouldn't have been difficult but somehow was. Taylor grabbed a plastic bag, added a bottle of water, a banana that was starting to brown, and 2 rolls left over from lunch service. She walked back to the door where the woman still stood, shaking, probably convinced that Taylor had gone to call the police or tell her to leave. "Here," Taylor said, handing over the bag. "It's still hot. The meatloaf is good. I made it myself earlier." The woman took the bag like it was made of gold, like it was the most precious thing she'd ever held. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. When she looked up at Taylor, tears were streaming down her face, cutting clean lines through the dirt on her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you. I can't. Thank you." And then something happened that Taylor would remember for the rest of her life. The woman did something that hunger and desperation and shame hadn't quite destroyed. She straightened up, just a little. She met Taylor's eyes. And for just a second, Taylor saw something else beneath the dirt and the desperation. Something that looked almost like dignity. Almost like the ghost of whoever this woman used to be before the world had broken her down. "What's your name?" the woman asked, her voice steadier now. Taylor Hayes." The woman nodded slowly, like she was memorizing it, saving it somewhere deep inside where memories lived. "Taylor Hayes," she repeated softly. "I won't forget." Then she turned and walked away into the November darkness, clutching that bag of food like it was a lifeline. Taylor stood in the doorway and watched her go, watched until she disappeared around the corner and was swallowed by the city night. Then she locked the door, cleaned up the kitchen, grabbed her coat and her tips, and started the long walk to the subway. She bought the ramen on the way home. Just the ramen. Spicy chicken flavor because it was on sale. Back in her apartment, she boiled water in the electric kettle Jake had bought her for her birthday 3 years ago, the last birthday they'd celebrated together. She ate the noodles standing at her kitchen counter, looking out the window at the lights of Queens stretched out like a carpet of stars that had fallen to earth and gotten stuck. Her stomach growled even after she finished eating. The ramen hadn't been enough. It never was. But that wasn't what kept her awake that night. Lying in bed and staring at the ceiling while her neighbor's television blared through the thin walls. What kept her awake was a question she couldn't answer. Who was that woman? How did someone fall so far that they ended up begging for food behind a diner in Queens? What had happened in her life to bring her to that moment, shaking in an alley, unable to meet a stranger's eyes? Taylor would never know that the woman she'd fed had once owned a penthouse 12 blocks away. Would never know that those trembling hands had signed contracts worth millions. Would never know that the shame in those eyes came not just from hunger, but from the complete destruction of everything a person thought they were. All Taylor knew was that she'd made a choice. A simple choice, really. To see another human being and respond with kindness instead of fear. To give what she had, even when she didn't have much to give. To be, for just one moment, the kind of person Jake had believed she was. She fell asleep a little after midnight, hungry and tired and wondering if that woman had found somewhere safe to sleep. Wondering if she'd eaten the meatloaf. Wondering if one meal could make any difference at all in a life that had clearly gone so wrong. What the waitress didn't know was that this wasn't just a hungry woman. It was someone who had once owned the very building they were standing in. Laura ate the meatloaf sitting on a bench in a park she didn't recognize. She ate slowly, methodically, forcing herself not to devour it all at once, even though every cell in her body screamed for her to consume everything immediately. She'd read somewhere, in her previous life when she read business journals and market analyses, that starving people could hurt themselves by eating too fast. Their bodies couldn't handle the shock of sudden nourishment after prolonged deprivation. The irony of remembering that now, sitting on a bench with dirt under her fingernails and shame coating her throat, almost made her laugh. Almost. But laughing required energy she didn't have. Emotions she'd locked away somewhere deep just to survive the last few weeks. The meatloaf was perfect. Home style, seasoned well, still warm. The mashed potatoes were creamy. The green beans had butter and garlic. Simple food.
The kind Laura hadn't eaten in 30 years. The kind her mother used to make before she died. Before Laura had transformed herself into the kind of woman who ate at restaurants where the menus didn't list prices and the wine cost more than most people's monthly rent. She thought about the waitress, Taylor Hayes, young, exhausted, moving like every step hurt. But she'd given this food anyway. Had looked at Laura, really looked at her, not through her the way most people did when they saw homeless women on the street. As if Laura had suddenly become invisible the moment she lost everything. As if poverty was contagious and making eye contact might infect you with failure. But Taylor had seen her, had seen past the dirt and the desperation to something human underneath. And that small act of recognition, of being seen as a person and not a problem, meant almost as much as the food itself. Laura finished eating and carefully folded the takeout container, tucking it into her pocket. She'd need it later. Maybe. Could use it to carry something else. Nothing could be wasted now. Every item, no matter how small, had potential value when you owned nothing at all. She walked for another hour, maybe 2. Time felt elastic now, stretching and compressing in ways that didn't make sense. The city moved around her in waves of noise and light, people rushing past on their way to places they needed to be, lives they were living, futures they were building. Laura was a stone in that river, stationary while everything else flowed past. Her phone had died 3 days ago. No charger, no money to buy one, no place to plug it in even if she had one. She'd lost track of the date. November something. Cold enough that her breath formed clouds in the air, but not yet cold enough for snow. The hearing was soon. Maybe next week. Maybe the week after. Without her phone, without access to her email or her calendar, or the lawyers who'd taken the last of her emergency cash and then stopped returning her calls, Laura had no way of knowing. She found herself walking toward Marcus's building without consciously deciding to go there. Her feet knew the way even if her mind was somewhere else, replaying the last 3 months on an endless loop, looking for the moment where she could have stopped this, the moment where she could have seen Richard's betrayal coming, the moment where she could have saved herself. But there was no such moment. That was the thing about betrayal. It worked precisely because you didn't see it coming. Because you trusted the person wielding the knife right up until the moment they slid it between your ribs. Marcus's building was a pre-war walk-up in Queens, the kind of place landlords bought cheap and maintained poorly, squeezing every possible dollar out of units that should have been condemned years ago. Laura had owned buildings like this once. Not this specific building, but ones just like it. Investment properties, assets on a spreadsheet. She'd never thought about the people living inside them. Never considered that each unit contained entire lives, entire stories, entire worlds of struggle and survival. She'd been a slumlord, she realized now, climbing the stairs to Marcus's 4th-floor apartment. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but through simple indifference. She'd cared about profit margins and property values and market positioning. The people paying rent had been numbers in a database, problems to be solved by property managers like Marcus, kept at arm's length so she could maintain the comfortable fiction that she was a businesswoman, not a landlord extracting money from people who couldn't afford better options. Marcus wasn't home. She'd known he wouldn't be. He worked until midnight most nights, managing a building in Brooklyn that, she'd learned through careful questions she'd tried to make sound casual, had recently been acquired by McAllister Properties, by Richard, in other words, using her company, her reputation, her life's work to expand an empire he'd stolen from her. But Marcus had given her a key, had pressed it into her hand 2 days ago and told her she could come back whenever she needed to, that his home was her home for as long as she needed it. The generosity had made her cry, which had embarrassed her, which had made her cry harder. She wasn't used to charity, wasn't used to needing it, wasn't used to the particular humiliation of accepting kindness from someone she used to employ, someone who made in a month what she used to spend on a single dinner. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it. Tiny. Maybe 400 square feet if you were generous with the measuring tape. A kitchenette with a hot plate and a mini fridge. A bathroom so small you had to stand sideways to close the door. A couch that folded out into a bed. One window that looked out onto an air shaft and someone else's brick wall. Marcus's entire life fit into this space. His clothes in a narrow closet. His books stacked in piles against the wall. His photographs on the windowsill. Parents, she thought, looking at the framed pictures of an older Asian couple smiling at the camera. Dead now, probably. Marcus had mentioned once, years ago when he still worked for her directly, that he sent money to his parents in Taiwan. Past tense. Sent. Not sends. Laura sat on the couch and felt the weight of everything pressing down on her chest like a physical thing. The food in her stomach felt heavy now, almost painful. Her body didn't know how to process nourishment anymore. Didn't know how to accept good things. Had adapted to deprivation so thoroughly that kindness felt like an attack. She thought about Richard, her baby brother. 7 years younger, always in her shadow, always second best at everything he tried. She'd helped him, brought him into the business, taught him everything she knew, given him opportunities he never would have found on his own, and he'd smiled and learned and waited for his moment. Had watched her carefully, studying her weaknesses the way a hunter studies prey. Had learned that her weakness was loneliness, was trust, was the desperate need to believe that family meant something, that blood mattered, that she wasn't as alone in the world as she felt. He'd used that weakness like a scalpel, had cut her apart with surgical precision, and the worst part, the part that kept her awake at night staring at Marcus's water-stained ceiling, was that she'd let him, had signed the papers, had trusted the lawyer, had been so tired, so ground down by years of being the strong one, the smart one, the one who always had to have the answers, that she'd made herself vulnerable for just one moment. One moment was all it took. The apartment was cold. Marcus probably kept the heat low to save money. Laura pulled the thin blanket off the back of the couch and wrapped it around her shoulders. It smelled like laundry detergent and something else. Something that might have been Marcus's cologne or aftershave. Clean. It smelled clean. When was the last time she'd felt clean? Really clean, not just surface clean, weeks ago. Back when she still had access to hotels with hot showers and fresh towels and little bottles of shampoo that smelled like lavender and civilization. She should sleep. Marcus would be home in a few hours. She should fold out the couch and lie down and try to rest, because rest was the only free thing left in the world, and she needed to take advantage of it while she could. But sleep felt impossible. Her mind raced, spinning through scenarios and possibilities and plans that all led nowhere. The hearing would happen. Eventually, maybe she'd win. Maybe some judge would look at the evidence and see through Richard's lies and restore what was rightfully hers. Maybe justice actually existed outside of fairy tales and legal dramas. Or maybe she'd lose. Maybe Richard's lawyers were better. Maybe the system was rigged in favor of whoever struck first. Maybe she'd spend the rest of her life like this, untethered and broken. A cautionary tale about pride and trust, and the distance between the penthouse and the gutter. Laura pulled the blanket tighter and let herself think about Taylor Hayes, the waitress who'd given away her own dinner, who'd looked tired enough to collapse but had still found the energy for kindness, who'd asked Laura's name like it mattered, like Laura was still a person with an identity beyond homeless woman in the alley. What was Taylor doing right now? Sleeping, probably. In some small apartment, in some narrow bed, dreaming whatever dreams came to people who worked themselves to exhaustion just to survive. Did she think about the woman she'd fed? Or had she already forgotten, moved on to the next problem, the next shift, the next impossible choice between kindness and self-preservation? Laura hoped she'd forgotten, hoped Taylor Hayes never spent a single moment worrying about the dirty woman in the alley. That girl deserved better than to carry other people's pain. Deserved to sleep peacefully, without the weight of the world's suffering pressing down on her chest. The city noise filtered through the thin walls, sirens in the distance. Someone shouting on the street below. A door slamming. Television laugh tracks from the next apartment. The sounds of life continuing, indifferent to individual suffering, rolling forward like a machine that never stopped and never cared who got crushed beneath its wheels. Laura must have dozed off because suddenly Marcus was there, standing in the doorway looking concerned and exhausted. The clock on the microwave said 1:30 in the morning. "Laura," he said softly, "you came back." "I'm sorry," she said automatically. "I can leave. I shouldn't be here. You've done too much already." "Stop," Marcus said. And there was something firm in his voice. Something that reminded Laura of the man she'd promoted 3 times in 10 years, the man who'd never missed a day of work and had never asked for anything he hadn't earned. "You're not leaving. Not tonight. Not until you have somewhere safe to go." He moved around the apartment with efficient, familiar movements, put his keys in the bowl by the door, hung up his jacket, filled a glass with water from the tap and handed it to her. "Did you eat?" he asked. "Yes," Laura said. "A waitress at a diner. She gave me food." Marcus nodded like this made perfect sense. Like millionaires accepting charity from waitresses was a normal part of the world's operation. "Good," he said. "That's good. You need to eat. You need to take care of yourself. The hearing is in 8 days." 8 days. Laura felt something crack open inside her chest. 8 days until she'd stand in a courtroom and face Richard. 8 days until a judge would decide if she'd spend the rest of her life as Laura McAllister, businesswoman and property magnate, or as the woman she'd become, the woman with dirt under her fingernails and shame in her throat, and someone else's charity keeping her alive. "Marcus," she said, and her voice broke. "What if I lose?" He sat down on the couch next to her. Didn't touch her, didn't invade her space, just sat close enough that she could feel another human presence. Another person existing in the same moment, sharing the same terrible understanding that sometimes life broke people and didn't bother putting them back together. "Then we figure out what comes next," Marcus said simply. "But you're not going to lose, because Richard is greedy and greedy, stupid people always make mistakes. And when he does, we'll be ready." Laura wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the certainty in his voice and let it fill up the empty spaces inside her. But belief required energy she didn't have, required hope, and hope was dangerous when you'd fallen as far as she had. She finished the water. Marcus offered her the couch, started to head toward the bathroom to get ready for a few hours of sleep before his next shift started. "Marcus," Laura said. "Why are you helping me?" He turned back, considered the question carefully. His face was shadowed in the dim light from the street outside. "Because you gave me a chance once," he said finally. "When I was nobody. When I barely spoke English and didn't have a degree and didn't know anyone who could open doors. You looked at my work and decided it was good enough. Decided I was good enough. You never asked me where I came from or why I was here or whether I deserved the opportunities you gave me. You just gave them." He paused. "So now it's my turn. That's how it works, Laura. Someone helps you, then you help someone else. And maybe, if we all do that enough times, the world becomes a little less cruel." He went into the bathroom and closed the door. Laura heard the water running, heard him moving around in that tiny space, preparing for sleep, preparing to wake up in a few hours and do it all again. Work and survive and help someone who probably didn't deserve his kindness. She lay down on the couch and pulled the blanket up to her chin. Her body ached. Her mind ached. Everything ached in ways that had nothing to do with physical pain. But for the first time in weeks, Laura McAllister felt something other than despair. It was small, fragile, barely there at all. But it was something. A tiny spark of possibility that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of her story. Maybe it was just the worst chapter, and chapters ended. New ones began. The book kept going. She closed her eyes and thought about Taylor Hayes, about Marcus Chen, about the strange mathematics of kindness that didn't make logical sense but somehow added up to something that felt almost like hope. Across the city, in a studio apartment in Queens, Taylor Hayes lay awake in her own bed, thinking about the woman in the alley, wondering if she was okay, wondering if one plate of meatloaf could possibly make any difference at all. Neither woman knew that tomorrow morning, at 8:12 exactly, black SUVs would turn onto the narrow street where Mel's diner sat between a laundromat and a pawn shop. Neither woman knew that the ending they both feared was actually the beginning of something else entirely. Neither woman could have imagined that their lives were about to collide again in ways that would change everything. At 8:12 a.m., black SUVs turned onto the narrow street where Taylor worked. Taylor was wiping down tables when the SUVs arrived. 3 of them, sleek and black and expensive in a way that didn't belong on this street, where cars were held together with duct tape and prayers, and the average vehicle age was somewhere around 15 years. The SUVs moved in formation, precise and deliberate, like a military convoy. They stopped directly in front of Mel's diner, engines purring with the kind of mechanical confidence that came from German engineering and price tags with too many zeros. The morning rush was just starting. Old Mr. Patterson at his usual booth, reading yesterday's newspaper and nursing his 3rd coffee refill. Maria and her daughter Sophia, stopping for pancakes before school. Tommy Chen, no relation to Marcus, eating eggs and scrolling through his phone. The regulars. The people who made this place something more than just a diner, who turned it into a community, a gathering spot, a small island of human connection in a city that worked very hard to keep everyone isolated. They all looked up when the SUVs arrived. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. Even the cook, Pete, who'd worked at Mel's for 23 years and claimed nothing surprised him anymore, came out from the kitchen to look through the window at the vehicles that clearly meant something was about to happen. Taylor felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. SUVs like that meant law enforcement or lawyers or wealthy people with problems, and none of those options ever brought anything good to neighborhoods like this. She thought about the woman from last night, the one she'd fed. Wondered with sudden paranoia if giving away food had somehow been illegal, if she was about to be arrested or fined or fired for an act of kindness that had felt right in the moment, but maybe violated some health code or corporate policy she didn't know existed. The doors opened simultaneously. Men in dark suits emerged. Not police, something else. Private security, maybe, or corporate muscle. They moved with military precision, scanning the street, the buildings, creating a perimeter. Then the lawyers came. You could tell they were lawyers by the briefcases, by the way they carried themselves with that particular brand of aggressive confidence that came from winning arguments for a living and charging $500 an hour for the privilege. And then Laura McAllister stepped out of the 3rd SUV, except she didn't look anything like the woman Taylor had fed last night. The transformation was so complete, so absolute, that for a moment Taylor wondered if her memory had failed her, if the woman in the alley had been someone else entirely. But no. It was her. The same bone structure, the same eyes, the same way of holding her shoulders. But everything else had changed. Laura wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Taylor made in 6 months. Her hair, washed and styled, fell in dark waves around her face. She wore minimal makeup, but professional. The kind that said, "I'm serious," rather than, "I'm trying to impress you." Her shoes were designer. Her watch caught the morning light and threw it back in expensive sparkles. She looked like money. Old money. The kind of money that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew. But it was her face that made Taylor's breath catch. Because beneath the clean clothes and the professional styling, beneath the armor of wealth and power that she'd somehow reclaimed overnight, Laura looked tired, bone deep, tired. The kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. And when her eyes met Taylor's through the diner window, there was something in that gaze that looked almost like fear. Laura walked toward the diner with purpose, flanked by 2 lawyers and followed by the security detail. The door chimed when she entered.
That same cheerful bell that rang 100 times a day and usually meant nothing more than another customer looking for coffee and eggs. But this time it felt different. This time it felt like the opening note of a symphony. The moment before everything changed. The diner went completely silent. Even the coffee maker seemed to hold its breath. Laura stopped a few feet inside, scanning the space until she found Taylor. Their eyes locked. Taylor felt frozen, uncertain, her brain trying to process what was happening and failing completely. This woman had been begging for food 12 hours ago, had been shaking from hunger, unable to meet her eyes, covered in dirt and desperation. And now she looked like she owned the world. Taylor Hayes, Laura said. And her voice was different too, stronger. The voice of someone used to being heard, used to having their words carry weight and consequence. But there was something underneath that strength, something that sounded almost like gratitude. Taylor started, but couldn't finish. Couldn't find words adequate for this moment, for this impossible transformation, for the feeling of reality tilting sideways and refusing to straighten out. One of the lawyers, a tall black man in his 50s with silver threading through his hair, stepped forward. He carried himself like someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms and boardrooms, someone who understood power and knew how to wield it. "Miss Hayes," he said formally, "my name is Daniel Ross. I'm the senior attorney for McAllister Properties. We'd like to speak with you, if you have a moment. It's regarding an incident that occurred last night." Taylor's anxiety spiked into full panic. She was going to be sued, or arrested, or both. She'd given away food that wasn't hers to give, and now this army of lawyers was here to make her pay for it. Her mind raced through calculations. She didn't have money for a lawyer, didn't have money for anything. If they sued her, they'd take everything. The nothing she had would become less than nothing. "I'm sorry," Taylor said quickly, the words tumbling out. "I didn't mean to break any rules. The food was going to be thrown out anyway. I didn't think anyone would mind. I can pay for it. I don't have much, but I can make payments. Please, I need this job. I can't—" "Miss Hayes," Laura interrupted gently, and the kindness in her voice stopped Taylor mid-panic. "You're not in trouble. That's not why we're here." She gestured to one of the empty booths. "May we sit? This might take a few minutes to explain." Taylor nodded numbly and led them to a booth by the window. Laura slid in across from her. Daniel Ross sat beside Laura. The other lawyer, a younger woman with sharp eyes and a tablet, remained standing. The security detail stayed outside, visible through the windows, creating a bubble of safety and intimidation around the diner. The other customers were openly staring now. Pete had abandoned all pretense of cooking and was watching from the kitchen window. Mr. Patterson had lowered his newspaper. This was the most interesting thing that had happened at Mel's since the time someone robbed it at gunpoint in 2019, and that guy had only gotten away with $43 and a broken coffee pot. Laura folded her hands on the table. They were clean now, manicured, but Taylor could see the remnants of recent trauma. The nails were still slightly ragged. There were healing cuts on her knuckles. The transformation might look complete, but it had happened fast. Too fast to erase everything. "Miss Hayes," Laura began, "last night you gave food to a stranger who asked for help behind this diner. Do you remember?" "Yes," Taylor said quietly. "That stranger was me, though I looked quite different then." Taylor nodded. She'd already figured that part out. "What you didn't know," Laura continued, "is who I was, who I am. My name is Laura McAllister. I'm the founder and, until recently, the CEO of McAllister Properties. Have you heard of it?" Taylor shook her head. Real estate empires didn't feature much in her daily life. "We own buildings throughout New York," Daniel Ross supplied. "Commercial and residential properties worth approximately $230 million. He paused. Let that number sink in. "Including this building, the one we're sitting in right now." Taylor felt the world tilt again.
The woman she'd fed, the woman who'd been shaking from hunger and couldn't meet her eyes, owned this building, owned Mel's, owned the laundromat next door and probably half the block, was worth more money than Taylor could conceptualize, more money than existed in Taylor's understanding of how the universe worked. 3 months ago, Laura said, I was betrayed by my brother. He orchestrated an elaborate fraud to steal my company, my assets, and my identity. He had me declared mentally incompetent through falsified medical records. He froze all my accounts, seized all my properties, and left me with nothing. Her voice remained steady, but Taylor could hear the effort that steadiness required. Everything I'd built over 30 years, gone in 72 hours. That's, Taylor started, then stopped. There were no words adequate for that kind of loss. Yesterday morning, Daniel Ross took over. We won an emergency injunction. A judge reviewed the evidence and determined that Richard McAllister's claims were fraudulent. The accounts have been unfrozen. The properties have been returned to Laura's control. And Richard McAllister is currently in custody facing charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Laura leaned forward slightly. But none of that is why I'm here, Taylor. I'm here because last night, when I had nothing, when I was nothing, you gave me something anyway. You gave me food. You gave me dignity. You saw me as a human being when everyone else saw through me like I was invisible. It was just meatloaf, Taylor said weakly. It was your dinner, Laura corrected softly. I saw your face when you made the decision. I saw the calculation, the sacrifice. You gave me the food you needed for yourself. You went home hungry so a stranger could eat. Taylor felt tears building behind her eyes and fought them back. She couldn't cry in front of all these people, in front of her customers, in front of this woman who apparently owned buildings and commanded lawyers and security teams. I wanted to come here myself to thank you, Laura continued, but also to do something more than just say thank you. She glanced at Daniel Ross, who opened his briefcase and withdrew a folder. Miss Hayes, the lawyer said formally, this is an employment contract. Laura would like to offer you a position with McAllister Properties as a resident services coordinator for our residential buildings. The salary is $75,000 annually, plus full benefits, health insurance, and a signing bonus of $25,000 to be paid immediately upon acceptance. Taylor's brain short-circuited. $75,000. She made $18,000 at the diner before taxes. The signing bonus alone was almost more than she made in a year. This wasn't real, couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. Taylor tried to find words. I don't have any experience in real estate. I'm a waitress. I don't have a college degree. I don't know anything about property management or coordination or whatever that job even means. You have the experience that matters, Laura said. You understand what it's like to struggle, to work hard for every dollar, to make impossible choices between self-preservation and kindness. Those are the people I want working for me. People who understand that buildings aren't just assets, they're homes. They're where people live their lives, raise their children, dream their dreams. I need someone who sees tenants as human beings, not as rent checks. She paused, held Taylor's gaze with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. You'll be trained. We have programs for that. We'll teach you everything you need to know about building management and tenant relations and maintenance coordination. But we can't teach empathy. We can't teach character. You already have those things. You proved that last night. Taylor's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table to hide it. This was too much. Too fast. Too impossible. There had to be a catch. There was always a catch. Why? She whispered. Why me? You could hire anyone. Someone qualified. Someone with experience. Because you gave me my last plate of food, Laura said simply. And because when I needed help, you helped me, even though it cost you something to do it. Because this world has enough people who only act when it benefits them, and not enough people who act because it's right. I want to build a company full of people like you, Taylor.
People who understand that sometimes the most important thing you can do is see another human being and respond with kindness. Daniel Ross slid the contract across the table. You don't have to decide right now. Take the day to think about it. Read through the contract. The offer is genuine and will remain open for 48 hours. But Taylor wasn't looking at the contract. She was looking at Laura, at this woman who'd somehow survived the complete destruction of her entire life and come back strong enough to show up here, in this diner, to thank the waitress who'd given her meatloaf. And Taylor thought about Jake, about his last words, about being the kind of person he believed she was. "Can I ask you something?" Taylor said. "Of course." "Last night, in the alley, were you really that hungry? Or was this some kind of test?" Laura's face shifted, and suddenly Taylor saw the woman from the alley again. The vulnerability, the shame, the raw humanity beneath the armor of wealth and power. "I was starving," Laura said quietly. "I hadn't eaten in 3 days. I was dizzy and weak, and honestly wasn't sure I'd make it through another night. That food saved me, Taylor. Literally saved me. This isn't a game or a test or some feel-good story about rich people in disguise. I was broken, completely broken. And you put me back together. Just a little bit. Just enough to survive one more day." She reached across the table, not quite touching Taylor's hand, but close enough to make the gesture meaningful. "So no, this isn't charity. It's not me being generous or noble. It's me recognizing someone who deserves better than working double shifts at a diner where the owner doesn't even pay overtime. Someone who deserves a chance the same way I got chances. Someone who proved, when it mattered, that they're exactly the kind of person this world needs more of." Taylor felt the tears spill over then. Couldn't stop them. Didn't try. She thought about the $63 in tips she'd made last night. About the ramen she'd eaten standing at her counter. About the medical bills that would take years to pay off. About Jake, who'd believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. She thought about second chances. About the mathematics of kindness. About how, sometimes, maybe, the universe balanced itself out in ways that didn't make sense, but somehow added up to grace. "Okay," Taylor said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, yes. I'll take the job." Laura smiled then, really smiled, and it transformed her face completely, made her look younger, lighter, like someone who'd been carrying impossible weight and had finally set it down, just for a moment. "Thank you," Laura said. "You won't regret this. I promise you won't regret this." Daniel Ross produced a pen. Taylor signed papers she barely read, her hands still shaking, her mind still trying to process this impossible reversal of fortune. $25,000, $75,000 a year, health insurance, benefits, a future that looked different from the one she'd imagined when she woke up this morning. The lawyers gathered their papers. The security detail received some signal Taylor didn't see. Laura stood up, straightened her jacket, became once again the powerful businesswoman who commanded attention and respect. But before she left, she leaned down close to Taylor and said quietly, "Just for her, you saved my life last night. Now let me help save yours." Then she was gone, out the door and into the SUV, the whole convoy pulling away from the curb and disappearing into New York traffic like they'd never been there at all. Taylor sat alone in the booth, staring at the contract in her hands, trying to convince herself that this had really happened, that her life had just changed completely in the space of 15 minutes. That kindness had been rewarded in a way that fairy tales promised, but real life almost never delivered. Pete came out from the kitchen. "What the hell just happened?" "I don't know," Taylor said honestly. "I really don't know." But she was smiling. For the first time in 2 years, since before Jake got sick, since before the world had collapsed around her, Taylor Hayes was smiling like she meant it. She didn't come back to thank her. She came back to change her life.
6 months later, Taylor stood in the lobby of McAllister Properties headquarters on Fifth Avenue, watching the morning rush of employees arriving for work. She still wasn't used to the marble floors, the soaring ceilings, the way light poured through floor-to-ceiling windows and made everything look like it belonged in a magazine spread. Still wasn't used to the fact that she worked here, that this was her life now. She wore a professional pantsuit, navy blue, that she'd bought with her first real paycheck. Not her signing bonus, which she'd used to pay off Jake's medical debt in one devastating, liberating payment that had made her cry for 2 hours straight. Her first earned paycheck. Money she'd made by learning, by working, by becoming someone she'd never imagined she could be. Her phone buzzed. A text from Laura. Conference room B, bringing coffee, the good kind, not the lobby sludge. Taylor smiled and headed for the elevator. 6 months, and she still felt a small thrill every time Laura texted her. Not because Laura was her boss, though she was, not because Laura was a millionaire, though she was that too, but because somehow, impossibly, they'd become friends. Real friends. The kind who texted each other stupid memes at midnight and called when they needed to talk and understood each other's damage in ways that didn't require explanation. The training had been intense. Taylor had learned about building codes and tenant rights, maintenance schedules and emergency protocols, conflict resolution and crisis management. She'd learned about budgets and inspections and the 1,000 small details that kept buildings running and people safe. But more than that, she'd learned that she was good at this. Better than good. She had instincts for people, for understanding what they needed before they asked, for solving problems in ways that made everyone feel heard and valued. Laura was already in the conference room when Taylor arrived, 2 coffee cups from the Italian place down the street sitting on the table. The good coffee, the kind that cost $7 and tasted like heaven. "You're spoiling me," Taylor said, taking her cup. "You've earned it," Laura replied. "I looked at your quarterly reviews. Your tenant satisfaction scores are the highest in the company. People love you." "People love feeling seen," Taylor said. "That's all I do. See them." Laura smiled. That warm, genuine smile that appeared more frequently now than it had 6 months ago. She looked different these days. Still professional, still powerful, but softer somehow. Like she'd found some kind of peace with what had happened to her. Like surviving the worst thing imaginable had somehow freed her from the fear of it happening again. "So," Laura said, settling into her chair, "I have news. Multiple pieces of news, actually. Want the legal stuff first or the personal stuff?" "Legal," Taylor decided. "Get the heavy stuff out of the way." Richard's trial concluded yesterday. Guilty on all counts. Fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and about 6 other charges I can't remember. 15 years minimum, possibly 25 with the sentencing enhancements. Taylor let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "How do you feel about that?" Laura was quiet for a moment, staring into her coffee like it might contain answers to questions she hadn't figured out how to ask yet. "Relieved," she said finally. "Sad, angry, grateful it's over. All of those things at once." She looked up, met Taylor's eyes. "He's my brother. I keep thinking I should feel worse about him going to prison. But mostly I just feel tired. Tired of being angry. Tired of replaying everything, trying to figure out where I went wrong. Tired of letting him take up space in my head." "That's not wrong," Taylor said gently. "You're allowed to feel however you feel. There's no right way to process betrayal like that." "My therapist says the same thing," Laura said with a slight smile. "You two would get along." The therapy had been Taylor's idea, actually. One night 3 months ago, sitting in Laura's office long after everyone else had gone home, Laura had broken down crying, just collapsed under the weight of everything she'd been holding together. And Taylor, who understood grief and trauma in ways she wished she didn't, had held her hand, and suggested that maybe talking to someone professional might help. Laura had resisted at first. Strong, successful women didn't need therapy, didn't need help, didn't need anything except their own determination and will. But eventually she'd gone, and it had helped, was still helping. "So that's the legal news," Laura said, pulling herself together. "The personal news is better, I promise. I'm listening. I'm starting a foundation, the McAllister Foundation for Women in Crisis. It'll provide emergency housing, job training, and support services for women who've lost everything. Women like I was 6 months ago. Women like you were 2 years ago." Taylor felt something catch in her chest. "Laura, that's amazing." "I want you to help run it," Laura continued. "Not full-time. You're too valuable in your current position, but as a board member, as someone who understands what it's like from the inside, someone who knows what these women need because you've been there. I don't know anything about running a foundation. Neither do I. We'll learn together, just like we've been learning everything else together." Taylor thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, exhausted, drowning in debt, working herself to death in a diner where nobody knew her name. Thought about the woman she was now, professional, stable, making more money than she'd ever imagined, living in a real apartment with heat that worked and neighbors who didn't fight through the walls, paying bills on time, sleeping through the night without waking up in panic about money. "Yes," she said. "Absolutely yes. I'd be honored." Laura's face lit up. "Good, because I already put your name on the paperwork." They both laughed. Then, the easy laughter of people who understood each other completely. Who'd seen each other at their worst and decided to stick around anyway. "There's one more thing," Laura said, and something in her tone made Taylor pay closer attention. "I'm renovating the building where Mel's Diner is located. The whole block, actually. Updating the apartments, fixing code violations, making it a place where people can actually live with dignity." "That's wonderful," Taylor said. "Those apartments needed work. I used to live near there. The conditions were pretty bad." "I know they were," Laura said quietly. "I owned them and I didn't care. Didn't even think about it, really. They were just numbers on a balance sheet. But that night, sleeping in Marcus's apartment, I understood what it meant to live in a place that's falling apart. What it does to your sense of worth when your landlord clearly doesn't value your comfort or safety." She pulled out a folder, slid it across the table to Taylor. "I'm converting Mel's into a community center. Free meals, job counseling, legal aid, healthcare services. A place where people can come when they need help and actually get it without judgment or bureaucracy or means testing." Taylor opened the folder, saw the architectural drawings, the budget projections, the detailed plans for transformation. "And I want to name it after someone," Laura continued. "Someone who understood that kindness matters. That seeing people matters. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is feed someone who's hungry. No questions asked." She pulled out one more piece of paper, a rendering of the building's new facade, with a sign above the door. The Jake Hayes Community Center. Taylor's vision blurred with tears. She tried to speak and couldn't. Tried again, and managed only a whisper. "Laura, you told me about him," Laura said softly. "About how he saw the best in people, how he made you want to be better, how he believed in kindness even when the world gave him every reason not to. That's the kind of person who deserves to be remembered. That's the kind of legacy that matters." Taylor was crying openly now, not caring who might see, not caring about anything except the overwhelming gratitude flooding through her chest. Jake, his name on a building. His memory transformed into something that would help people, that would feed them and shelter them and give them hope when they had none left. He would have loved this, Taylor managed. He would have been so proud. "I know," Laura said. "That's why I want to do it. Not for me, for him, for you,
For everyone who's ever needed help and been lucky enough to find someone who gave it. They sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. The gift of remembrance, the mathematics of kindness coming full circle in ways neither of them could have predicted 6 months ago, when one was starving in an alley and the other was working herself to death in a diner. "Thank you," Taylor said finally. "Thank you for all of it. For the job and the friendship, and for seeing me the same way I saw you. For understanding that we're all just people trying to survive and sometimes we need each other to make it through." "Thank you for feeding me when I was hungry," Laura replied. "For giving me your last plate of food. For reminding me that I was still human even when I felt like I'd lost everything that made me who I was." Laura stood up, walked around the table, and pulled Taylor into a hug. Not a professional hug, not a polite hug, a real one. The kind that acknowledged shared trauma and shared healing, and the strange, beautiful fact that sometimes terrible things led to connections that changed everything. "We're going to help so many people," Laura said quietly. "You and me, we're going to build something that matters." "We already did," Taylor replied. "We built this." They pulled apart, both wiping tears, both smiling through them. Outside the conference room, the city moved on in its endless rhythm. Millions of people living their lives, fighting their battles, trying to survive in a world that often felt designed to break them down. But here, in this room, 2 women who'd survived the breaking had found each other, had built something stronger than either of them could have managed alone, had proven that sometimes, just sometimes, kindness wasn't wasted, that seeing people mattered, that choosing to help, even when it cost you something, even when you couldn't afford it, even when every logical calculation said to protect yourself first, sometimes that choice changed everything. Marcus Chen knocked on the conference room door. He'd been promoted to Director of Property Management 3 months ago, a position he'd earned through 15 years of loyal service and a decision to help someone when helping her was dangerous and difficult. He smiled when he saw them. "The contractor's here about the community center renovation," he said. "Wants to confirm the timeline for Jake's memorial plaque." "Tell him we'll be right there," Laura said. Marcus nodded and left. Laura gathered her papers, straightened her jacket, transformed back into the CEO who ran a $230 million company with efficiency and grace. But before they left the conference room, she turned to Taylor one more time. "I need you to know something," she said. "That night behind the diner, I'd given up. I was ready to disappear, to become just another statistic, another person who fell through the cracks and nobody noticed. And then you saw me. You really saw me. And you chose kindness when you had every reason to choose self-preservation. You saved my life, Taylor. Not metaphorically, literally. You saved my life." "You saved mine too," Taylor said. "You gave me a future I never thought I could have. You gave me hope when I'd forgotten what hope felt like. We saved each other." Laura smiled. "Yeah, I guess we did." They walked out together, side by side, 2 women who'd survived impossible things and come out stronger for it. 2 women who'd learned that the distance between the penthouse and the gutter was shorter than anyone wanted to admit, and that sometimes the only thing separating them was one act of kindness from a stranger who decided to see you as human. The Jake Hayes Community Center opened 4 months later. The line stretched around the block on opening day. Families who needed food, people who needed jobs, individuals who needed someone to see them, really see them, and offer help without judgment. Taylor worked the opening shift, greeting people at the door, learning names, making connections. Laura moved through the crowd, talking to families, listening to stories, understanding in a way she never had before that buildings weren't just real estate. They were homes. They were communities. They were where life happened. At the end of the day, exhausted and satisfied, they stood together outside the center, looking up at Jake's name above the door. "Think he'd be proud?" Taylor asked. "I think he already was," Laura replied. "I think he knew exactly who you were and exactly what you were capable of. He just didn't get to see you become it."
Maybe he does see it, Taylor said.
Maybe somehow he knows. They stood in comfortable silence as the sun set over New York, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The city that had broken them both had also healed them, had taken two women at the end of their ropes and given them a chance to rebuild, to become something new, to prove that survival wasn't just about enduring. It was about choosing every single day to see the humanity in others and respond with kindness even when kindness was hard. Money could disappear, power could be stolen, empires could crumble overnight, but character revealed itself when no one was watching. When you had nothing left to gain and everything to lose. When the easiest choice was to look away and the hardest choice was to see. Taylor Hayes had chosen to see, and that choice had rippled outward in ways she never could have imagined, touching lives and changing futures and proving that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe had a sense of justice after all. Not the kind of justice that comes from courtrooms and judges, the deeper kind, the kind that says you get back what you give, that kindness matters, that seeing people matters, that in a world designed to make us invisible to each other, the most revolutionary act is simply to look at another human being and say, I see you, you matter, let me help. That was the legacy Laura and Taylor built together, not a company or a foundation or a building, though they built all of those things too. The real legacy was simpler and more profound. They built a world where kindness was possible, where help was available, where people who'd fallen could find hands reaching down to pull them back up. They built the world they'd needed when they needed it most, and in building it, they'd found something neither of them had expected to find again. They'd found hope. If this story touched you, stay with us. There are many more stories like this, made with care, respect, and heart. Stories about real people facing real struggles and finding unexpected grace. Stories about survival and kindness and the small moments that change everything. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing that these stories matter, because they do, and so do you. Thank you for listening.